The first shot cracked like lightning splitting sandstone. A tin can spun off the fence post and clattered into the dust, leaving a trail of smoke curling from the barrel of Naomi Yazzi's Winchester. She didn't blink. The desert didn't allow for blinking, not when the sun was this sharp, the air this dry, and every sound carried like a warning. Naomi stepped forward, boots grinding into the red grit just past the edge of town. She set another can on the post, her last one, and stepped back, the butt of her rifle snug against her shoulder. Then came the second shot, dead center. The can flipped midair and disappeared into the sagebrush. Naomi lowered the rifle and exhaled. She didn't shoot for fun, not anymore. Behind her, the morning wind kicked up dust from the town's single main road, stirring the scent of horses, bread, iron, and sweat. Somewhere downwind, someone was watching her again. She could feel it. She always could. They never said it outright, not to her face, but the words still found her. Half-blood, strange girl, the one with the gun. Naomi slung the Winchester over her back and turned toward town, where the buildings looked like they were barely holding their breath. The year was 1878, and Red Earth Crossing was a place that tried to forget it was built on stolen land. She walked alone. She always walked alone. The general store loomed ahead, its porch warped from sun and time. Naomi's father was still in Santa Fe, bartering over salt and coffee. That left her to run the store, a task she took seriously, especially since the last time her father left. She had to chase a drunken miner out with a loaded gun. She climbed the steps, unlocked the door, and let herself into the scent of dried beans and saddle soap. The store was dark and cool compared to the glaring light outside. She placed the rifle behind the counter within reach and removed her hat. Her long dark braid, streaked with reddish dust, fell against her shoulder. She was barely behind the counter when the door creaked open. Naomi didn't look up. She heard the boot scrape first, then the pause, then the voice, up shooting again. Miss Ya. It was Mrs. Prudence Holloway, as sour as unripe cactus fruit, and just as prickly. She stood in the doorway like she owned the wind, flanked by her niece Emma, a girl too nervous to speak. Naomi met her gaze flatly. Tin cans, they don't talk back. Mrs. Holloway's lips tightened. It's not seemly for a young woman to be out in the desert before dawn. And with that, thing slung across your back, she said, thing like it was venom. Naomi didn't rise to the bait. Better the rifle than what's hiding in the hills. Mrs. Holloway sniffed. You'll never find a husband with a gun on your shoulder. Naomi smiled, slow and dry. Then I'll aim for a different kind of future. Mrs. Holloway turned on her heel. Emma offered a quiet, apologetic smile before following her aunt out the door. Naomi exhaled, the smile fading. The rifle hadn't just made her different, it had made her a target. But she remembered her father's words the day he gave it to her. If they won't respect your voice, make sure they respect your aim. She had never forgotten it. By late morning, the store filled with heat and murmurs. Men came in for tobacco and nails. Women pretended not to notice Naomi. A few made pointed comments about her wild ways. She let them speak. Words didn't wound unless you gave them space to land. The bell jingled again. This time, it wasn't a local. A man stepped inside, tall and dust-covered, with eyes like a storm building over the mesas. He took off his hat, revealing thick black hair and a sun-creased face. He looked like he belonged to the road. Naomi stood a little straighter behind the counter. "Good day," she said, her tone neutral. "Need something? Coffee, bullets, something sweet, if you've got it." His voice was warm, but there was steel underneath. He walked the store like he'd been in 100 just like it, yet still took the time to study the jars, the tins, the shelves. "I'm Caleb Morgan," he said after a moment. "Drove cattle from Gallup. Heard the Palmer Ranch was buying." Naomi nodded. "They are. You run this place." "Only when the sheriff doesn't." Caleb grinned at that. As Naomi rang up his items, he glanced behind the counter. "That, a Winchester 73. She paused. "You know your rifles." "My father was a gunsmith. Died when I was 16. Said a good weapon's like a good dog, loyal, if you treat it right." Naomi met his gaze. "Mine's more like a wolf." Caleb didn't laugh. He only nodded. Respectful silence. That was rare. Before he left, he added, "This town always treats you like that." Naomi's lips curved slightly. "Only when I'm awake." Outside, the wind changed. Naomi felt it in her bones. Something shifting, something coming that night. She closed up early, locked the bolts tight. cleaned the rifle, ate alone at the edge of her dreams. She saw smoke on the horizon, not from a cook fire, from something worse. Let them whisper, Naomi thought, her fingers still warm on the trigger. This rifle speaks louder. The sun had barely cleared the jagged cliffs when Naomi saw them. 5 riders approached red earth crossing from the southern ridge, dust trailing behind like ghost smoke. They didn't gallop, they didn't hurry. They moved with the slow, deliberate confidence of men who didn't need to prove anything, men used to taking what they wanted. Naomi stood on the wooden porch of the general store, arms crossed over her apron, the Winchester already leaning by the doorframe. The wind carried the distant jingle of bridles and the low thud of hooves. Townsfolk began to notice 2 shutters creaked, conversations hushed, and someone at the far end of the street drew a curtain tight. She squinted against the light, heart pacing not with fear, but anticipation. Caleb Morgan was at the front. He rode easy, like he'd been born in the saddle, with a relaxed grip on the reins, and a look that scanned everything but gave away nothing. The moment his eyes found Naomi, he dipped his head, just slightly. It wasn't a greeting, it was recognition. She didn't smile. He didn't expect her to. The horses clattered to a stop near the trough, in front of the saloon. The men dismounted, stretching legs and muttering low. One spat into the dust. Another leaned against a hitching post like he owned it. Caleb dismounted last, handed his reins to a younger man, and walked across the street like the town wasn't holding its breath. Naomi turned and went inside. She didn't lock the door. A few minutes later, the bell jingled again. Caleb stepped through, hat in hand. "Morning," he said. "Didn't think you'd be back this quick," she replied, not looking up from the ledger she was updating. "Thought Palmer Ranch would have you working cattle by now." Caleb walked slowly to the counter, setting down a pouch of coins and a worn leather list. "Still waiting on signatures," he said. "Figured I'd resupply the boys while I'm in limbo." "Anything in particular?" she asked, setting the ledger aside. "Salt, dried meat, tobacco, something sweet." Again, his mouth twitched. "You make that pie in the back, or is it just decoration?" Naomi arched a brow. "Clara Ruiz makes the pies. I don't bake for strangers." "Then I'd like to become less of one." That pulled her gaze to his. He met it without flinching. There was no smirk, no arrogance, just interest. Real, steady. She turned away before he could read too much. "There's lemon pie in the cooler." While she packed his order, Caleb wandered the store. He ran his fingers along a shelf of nails, inspected a coil of rope. He didn't speak again until she placed the wrapped pie and tobacco on the counter. "You always carry that rifle." Naomi didn't look up. "You always ask questions you already know the answer to." "I've known men to carry rifles and still not be dangerous," he said. "But you carry it like it's part of you." She paused, then met his eyes again. "Maybe it is." He nodded once, accepting that answer. Behind them, the door swung open with a gust of hot wind and the heavy stomp of boots. Ezekiel Harper entered, all gritted teeth and swagger. His coat was too fine for the dust, his hat worn just enough to seem honest. 2 of his ranch hands flanked him, wide-shouldered and dumb-eyed. "Well," Ezekiel drawled, "look at that, the wild girl and the wanderer. What a pair." Naomi didn't answer. Caleb turned slowly. "Can I help you?" Caleb asked, voice calm. "I was asking myself the same thing," Ezekiel said, walking to the counter. "See, Miss Yazzie here usually keeps to herself, won't give a man the time of day. Now, all of a sudden, she's talking sweet to a stranger with road dirt on his boots." "I'm not sweet," Naomi said flatly, "and I don't answer to you." Ezekiel chuckled, eyes dark. "Ain't that the truth?" He leaned forward, voice lowering. Still, a word of caution. "Morgan, that girl's got a temper, carries a gun, don't care for church, and thinks she's better than the rest of us. You might want to find a more manageable woman." Caleb's jaw tightened, but his tone stayed level. "You say that like it's supposed to scare me." Ezekiel's smirk faltered. "I've been through towns like this," Caleb went on. "Seen men like you, think you own everything you look at, think a woman's only worth the weight of her silence." He stepped closer, his voice low, sharp. "Thing is, where I come from, a woman who can shoot straight is someone you respect or regret underestimating." For a moment, the only sound was the creak of the ceiling fan overhead. Then Ezekiel laughed a short, forced bark turned to Naomi. "You sure know how to pick 'em," he said. Naomi lifted the Winchester from behind the counter, not aiming, not threatening, just reminding. I picked for myself. Ezekiel stared a beat longer, then turned and left, his men trailing behind him like shadows. When the door shut, Caleb let out a slow breath. Naomi set the rifle down. He won't forget that, she said. He shouldn't, Caleb replied. She looked at him, then really looked, not as a drifter, not as another man passing through, but as someone who had just made himself visible in a town that preferred its women quiet and its strangers gone. He paid for his supplies, picked up the pie. Thanks, he said, then paused. For everything. Naomi nodded once. Don't let it get cold. He was halfway out the door when he said it soft, almost to himself. That woman, Caleb murmured under his breath, ain't just guarding a store, she's guarding a fire. She heard it, didn't let it show, but something flickered behind her eyes as she turned back to the counter. Outside, the town moved again, quiet, cautious, like animals before a storm. That woman, Caleb murmured under his breath, ain't just guarding a store, she's guarding a fire. That night, under a sky heavy with stars and silence, Naomi will climb the red mesa alone and find someone waiting in the shadows, not just to speak, but to warn. Jesse Red Elk has come home, and what he brings with him will crack the ground beneath her feet. Naomi didn't sleep that night. The air was too still, the town too quiet. After Ezekiel's visit on, Caleb's words echoing through her thoughts, Naomi found herself restlessly pacing the small apartment above the store. The rifle was propped by the bed, the windows open to let in the breeze that never came. Somewhere in her chest, something coiled and unsettled. By midnight, she was pulling on her boots. She needed open sky. She needed stone beneath her feet and silence that didn't come with eyes watching her every move. The moon was bright enough to see the trail. Without a lantern, her boots stirred fine red dust as she walked the familiar path up the side of the Mesa Rocha, as the town called it. The Red Mountain. To her, it was more than a name. It was a place of blood and memory. It was where her mother had taught her how to listen to the wind, where her father first let her fire a single shot into the sky, where she'd sat alone for years, sorting out who she was between two worlds, between two names. She reached the top just as the breeze picked up, carrying the cool scent of creosote and sage. She sat, resting the rifle across her lap, eyes scanning the horizon. Then came the sound. Not loud, not sudden, just there, a shift in the air, the rustle of movement too intentional to be wind. She turned and froze. A figure stood at the edge of the stone outcrop, long dark hair braided back, a woven sash tied at his waist, a bow slung over one shoulder. Jesse, she whispered, squinting. He stepped forward, into the moonlight. Still sharp, he said, didn't even make a sound. Naomi stood, heart quickening. He looked like a ghost. Feel like one, Jesse Red Elk replied. They stared for a moment, then, without warning, she crossed the space between them and hugged him tight, arms clenched around his back like she needed to be sure he was real. I thought you left for good, she murmured. I tried. They pulled apart. Naomi studied his face, the strong cheekbones, the sun-leathered skin, the eyes that always looked like they were chasing something too far away to catch. You're thinner, she said. You're stronger, he replied. They sat down near the cliff's edge, the desert stretching out below like an endless painting. You still carry it? He asked, nodding toward the rifle. Everywhere. Jesse nodded, his gaze turning serious. Then listen to me close, sister. She did. I've been tracking movement north of the basin, he began. Riders, not cattlemen, not soldiers. Quiet, organized, scarves over their faces and cold eyes. Naomi swallowed. Los Lobos? That's what they call themselves. But these aren't just thieves. They move like they're hunting. Her stomach tightened. You're sure they're heading this way? They're already close. 2 days, maybe less. They're watching the towns looking for weak ones. Red Earth Crossing is small. Naomi, easy pickings. She looked away, jaw tight. The sheriff thinks his men can handle it. They can't. These men don't bluff. They don't just rob, they send messages. Naomi's hands gripped the rifle. Then we send one back. Jesse looked at her, eyes narrowing. You're serious? I've always been serious. You remember when we were kids, he said, when you used to line up pine cones and pretend they were outlaws. I don't play anymore. Jesse, no. That's what scares me. He stood, his silhouette sharp against the stars. You need to tell the town the real story, not rumors. They won't listen to me. They will if you tell them what I saw. Tell them I saw fire in the canyon, burned wagons, bleached bones. Naomi felt cold crawl up her spine. You saw that? I stepped over the ash. That's how I know. They're not just thieves. She rose slowly, brushing dust from her skirt. Then we start preparing now. If no one else will listen, we'll make them. Jesse nodded once. We start with the store. You know the layout, where the choke points are. You've got ammo. Plenty. He placed a hand on her shoulder. I'm glad you stayed, Naomi. The others, they all drifted off. But you stayed. You remembered who you are. She looked him in the eyes, voice low. I remember everything. They stood in silence for a long moment, the wind tugging gently at their clothes, carrying voices of the old landlord, ancient, patient. You see that new one? Jesse asked suddenly. Naomi blinked. New one. The cattleman. Caleb something. Her breath caught. He's different, she said cautiously. Jesse tilted his head. Different how? He doesn't look at me like I'm something broken. Jesse smirked faintly. You're not broken. I know, she replied, but I'm tired of proving it. Jesse studied her for a beat, then looked toward the town. Barely visible from the mesa. There's going to be blood, he said quietly. Don't let your heart get soft now. She lifted the rifle and checked the chamber, voice steady it never was. As Jesse disappeared down the slope, Naomi stood alone on the mesa, rifle in hand, eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the town. Something was coming. She could feel it in her teeth, in her bones. She turned, beginning the long descent back into town. Tomorrow, she'd speak to Clara, then to the sheriff, then to Caleb. If Los Lobos wanted Red Earth Crossing, they'd have to get through her first. Coyotes are running in daylight, Jesse said grimly. That never means anything good. When Naomi returns, Clara Ruiz brings more than fresh bread. She brings news, real news, the kind with names and places. And suddenly, what Jesse saw in ash and fire becomes impossible to ignore. The store was already warm by the time Naomi unlocked the doors. The desert sun crawling over the rooftops like a slow-breathing predator. She moved quickly through her usual routine, sweeping dust, lighting the stove for coffee, checking the ledger, but her thoughts were elsewhere. On Jesse, on what he saw, on what was coming. She glanced at the rifle propped beside the register. Cleaned, loaded, oiled. The steel felt more honest than most people in town. The bell above the door jingled. Clara Ruiz stepped inside, balancing a tray covered with a checkered cloth. Her cheeks were flushed from the walk, dark curls sticking out from under her scarf. Naomi moved to help without a word. You look like you haven't slept, Clara said, placing the tray gently on the counter. I haven't, Naomi replied. Clara raised a brow. That has something to do with the man you met on the mesa last night. Naomi froze. You saw us. Clara shook her head. No, but word gets around. One of the hill boys was out hunting rabbits, saw movement up near the ridge, thought it was cougars, until he realized one of them was carrying a rifle, and the other looked like a ghost. Naomi smirked faintly. That would be Jesse. Clara's eyes softened. He's back. Then Naomi nodded. And he brought warnings. Clara took a breath, suddenly serious. So did I. Naomi's eyes locked on hers. Clara removed a folded piece of paper from her coat, pocket-worn, dirt-stained, edges fraying. She laid it flat on the counter. It's a list, she said. Names, dates, locations. Naomi scanned it. The handwriting was hurried, the ink blotched in places. 3 towns, 7 days, each one struck by men wearing red bandanas and moving fast. Who gave you this? Naomi asked. My cousin in Las Cruces, Clara said. She's a healer. Rode into town after a fire. Found body. One of the survivors scribbled this before he died. Naomi felt her mouth go dry. These are real, she whispered. This isn't just rumor. I wouldn't bring it to you if it wasn't. Naomi folded the paper carefully and tucked it into her apron. Thank you. Clara hesitated. Do you think they'll come here? They already are, Naomi said. We're just too proud or too blind to see it. Clara pressed her lips together. I'll spread the word quietly. The women first, the ones who'll believe. Naomi nodded. Start with the She's got 2 rifles under her bed and no patience for cowards. They shared a tense smile. Before Clara could leave, the door opened again. This time, it was Caleb. He took one look at their faces and paused. Did I interrupt something? No, Naomi said. You're just on time. Caleb approached slowly, tipping his hat to Clara. Miss Ruiz, Mr. Morgan. He turned to Naomi. You look like you've been reading bad news. I have, she said, holding up the paper. 3 towns burned, witnesses gone or buried. Caleb frowned, eyes scanning the list. You think it's Los Lobos? I don't think, Naomi said. I know. Clara looked between them. You two need to speak to the sheriff. Soon he won't listen to me. But you, she looked to Caleb, you might make him sit up. Caleb's jaw tightened. He'll listen. I'll make sure of it. After Clara left, Caleb lingered. Naomi busied herself behind the counter, wrapping parcels of flour and checking inventory. But he didn't move. Finally, she turned to him. What? He crossed his arms. You trust Jesse? With my life? Caleb nodded. Then I trust him to... Naomi was surprised at the ease of that answer. You don't even know him. I don't have to, Caleb said. I know you, and I trust your judgment more than anyone else in this town. She looked away, trying to hide the way her throat tightened. It had been a long time since someone said something like that without strings, without questions. Caleb glanced toward the window. I'll go see the sheriff. You keep the store ready. If they come, it won't be through the front door. Naomi nodded. I'll fortify the storeroom. It's the only place with thick enough walls. He moved to the door, then paused. I meant what I said the other day, he added, voice low. You don't need anyone, but I think you deserve someone. Naomi froze, hand halfway to the flour sack. He left before she could answer. That night, Naomi sat on the store's rooftop with Jesse, watching the stars. They're getting close, he said, chewing a strip of jerky. My guess is they'll come before the next moon. We've got maybe 3 days, then 2, if they're fast. Naomi looked toward the southern ridge, where the sky bled into black. Caleb went to the sheriff, she said, to warn him. Jesse grunted. Let's hope he's better with words than bullets. Naomi didn't reply. Bide below them, Red Earth Crossing slept in silence. A fragile, dangerous kind of peace, the kind that breaks when a single match strikes. If Los Lobos reach Red Earth Crossing, Jesse said, this whole town will burn. Caleb confronts the sheriff and townsfolk, but meets resistance and the weight of Ezekiel Harper's influence. As tensions rise, Naomi realizes they can't count on authority. They'll have to defend Red Earth Crossing themselves. The sheriff's office smelled like damp paper, sour tobacco, and sweat too old to scrub from the floorboards. Caleb stood across from Sheriff Tom Albright, a thick-set man with red knuckles and a mustache that twitched every time he heard something he didn't like. At the moment, was everything Caleb had just said. Albright leaned back in his chair, the old wood creaking beneath him. You sure about this? He asked, as if Caleb had casually mentioned a stray dog, not an approaching gang of killers. I wouldn't be here if I wasn't. Albright grunted and ran a hand over his face. You got proof? Caleb stepped forward, pulling the folded list Clara had given Naomi. He laid it on the desk. 3 towns, same pattern, same gang. They're moving in a straight line and Red Earth Crossing is next. The sheriff stared at the list but didn't touch it. I've heard the name Los Lobos, he said slowly. Always second-hand, always with too much fear in the voice to believe it straight. They're real, Caleb said, and they're close. Tom scratched his jaw, clearly torn. We've got 9 deputies, half of them green as spring barley. The rest are busy keeping the Palmer boys from knifing each other. Then deputize more, Caleb said. Arm the civilians, prepare the town. People panic, easy. The sheriff muttered. I say the word attack, and I've got a stampede to the train station by sundown. Better a stampede than a massacre, Caleb said. Albright looked up, finally meeting his eyes. I've been doing this a long time, Morgan. Men ride through towns, big talk, bigger warnings, and half the time, it's thunder with no lightning. You expecting me to drain the town's resources on a maybe? Caleb stepped in, low voice like gravel. I don't care what you drain. I care that this town doesn't end up in smoke and shallow graves. The sheriff held his stare for a long beat. Then, I'll speak to the council tonight. No promises. Caleb gave a slow nod and turned toward the door. But just before he reached it, a voice called from behind him. Well, that didn't take long. Ezekiel Harper leaned in the doorway, arms crossed, hat pushed back just enough to show the smirk on his face. His 2 ever-present goons flanked him like a pair of poorly built statues. Caleb stopped, but didn't flinch. I heard you've been whispering stories to rile up the town, Ezekiel said. That true? I tell the truth, Caleb said. If it riles you up, maybe you're the problem. Ezekiel's grin faded slightly. You think some no-name gang is gonna scare Red Earth? This town's been through worse." "No," Caleb said. "This town's just forgotten what real danger looks like." The room tensed. Albright cleared his throat. "That's enough, both of you." But Ezekiel wasn't finished. He stepped forward, voice quieter, colder. "You spend too much time around that half-blood girl, Morgan. Makes a man forget who he answers to around here." Caleb's hand curled into a fist at his side. "You think I answer to you?" he asked. "I think you better remember your place before you start picking sides. That'll get you killed." Caleb's voice dropped. "I've already picked a side, Harper. It's the one that's not hiding behind old money and bad manners." A tense silence followed. Albright's voice cut in again, sharper this time. "Get out, both of you." Outside, the sun was harsh and the air smelled of dry wood and tension. Caleb walked down the street, boots striking harder than usual against the dirt. He didn't head to the saloon. He headed for Naomi's store. Naomi was already on the porch, hammering boards across the lower windows. She didn't look surprised to see him. "What?" she asked. He shook his head. "Sheriff'll talk to the council, but I wouldn't bet on action." Harper was there. Of course he was. She moved to the next window. Caleb grabbed a second hammer and joined her. For a while, they worked in silence, mailing, measuring, reinforcing. Then Caleb said, "Harper made it clear. He sees you as the enemy." Naomi's eyes narrowed, but her voice stayed even. "He always did. I just stopped pretending otherwise. He threatened me too," Caleb added. Naomi paused. "You gonna back down?" He looked at her. "You already know the answer." They locked eyes, something heavy and quiet passing between them. "You should go," she said softly. "I'm not leaving." "You should." "I won't." A long silence stretched between them. Then Naomi looked away. "We're building a defense inside the store. Jesse's coming back with supplies. Clara's spreading the warning quietly." "Then we keep going," Caleb said. "Even if the sheriff won't help, we'll make a stand. Just us. For now." Naomi nodded once, then motioned to the back room. "Help me move the crates. We're going to stack them into a barricade." That night, the town looked the same on the surface lights and windows. Piano music leaking from the saloon, men playing cards on porches, but underneath, the tension coiled like a snake under the floorboards. Naomi walked the store one last time before closing, checking every window, every shutter, every round of ammunition. As she was bolting the door, Caleb stopped her. "You sure about this?" he asked. "No," she replied, "but I'd rather stand than run." They shared a moment of quiet. Then Caleb smiled. "I've seen men face battle with less steel in their spine." Naomi didn't smile, but her voice held a thread of warmth. "Maybe I was born for this." As she turned to lock the final bolt, Caleb said, "It's the line that stuck in the air long after they both had gone still." "If I don't come back in 2 days," he said, mounting his horse, "load your rifle and tell the town to pray." "If I don't come back in 2 days," he said, mounting his horse, "load your rifle and tell the town to pray." In the quiet dawn that follows, Caleb and Naomi share something unspoken, trust forged under pressure. And as the sun rises over the mesa, they'll find a moment of peace before the storm, a morning of tenderness, of truth, before war comes to Red Earth Crossing. Dawn came soft and slow, brushing the red mesas with pale gold. The storm hadn't hit yet, but Naomi could feel it pressing at the edge of the light, like a held breath. She stood at the rear of the store, brushing flour dust from her skirt, hands still calloused from hammering boards all night. The rifle lay on the table, fully loaded, within reach always. Caleb hadn't left after all. He'd stayed behind the store, camping near the water trough with his bedroll and saddlebag. Said he'd leave at first light to scout the southern ridges, see if Jesse's warning was already too late. But the light had come, and he was still there, sitting on the steps now, elbows on his knees, watching the town with quiet intensity. Naomi brought out 2 tin mugs of coffee, steam curling upward in the cold morning air. He looked up as she approached, took one without a word. They sat together, side by side on the wooden steps. No townsfolk, no eyes, just silence and dust, and the weight of what hadn't happened yet. "He didn't leave," she said finally. "I will," he replied. "Just needed a minute." She sipped the coffee. "You'll need more than a minute when the shooting starts." He looked at her, really looked, like he was memorizing something. "You ever think about leaving this place?" She didn't answer right away. "I did, when I was younger, after my mother died." He waited, but every time I reached the edge of town, something pulled me back. The dust, The ghosts. My father's hand on my shoulder, even after he was gone. Caleb nodded. I know that feeling. They drank in silence again. Above them, the sun crept higher, setting the rooftops aglow. I've been alone most of my life, she said quietly. By choice, by circumstance. I stopped needing people. He didn't speak, didn't interrupt. But lately, she continued, I've been wondering if that's still true, or just something I tell myself to make solitude feel like strength. Caleb's voice was low. You're strong either way. Naomi turned to him, eyes sharp. But strength ain't the same as peace. No, he said. It's not. There was a long pause, thick with things unspoken. Then, with surprising gentleness, he reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face. His fingers were calloused but careful, and for a moment, her breath caught. You don't have to keep proving yourself, Naomi. She looked down. Don't know how to stop. Then don't stop, he said. Just know there's someone who sees you even without the rifle in your hands. She didn't answer. Didn't need to. Her silence said more than words ever could. Behind them, a horse nicked. A crow cawed from the water tower. The town was waking, but slowly, like it knew the day didn't belong to it anymore. Caleb stood, drained the last of his coffee, and adjusted the cinch on his saddle. I'll be gone by the hour. I'll take the east trail ride, the ridge to the canyon overlook, then double back. Naomi followed him to the front of the store. If you see anything strange, don't engage. Just return. He nodded, but they both knew he wouldn't follow that advice if trouble came. Just before he mounted, he turned and said, You know, when this is over, if we're still standing. Naomi raised an eyebrow. Caleb smiled, just barely. I think we could build something here. You and me. She didn't smile back, but her voice was steady. Then come back alive, cowboy. He mounted, kicked gently, and the horse began its slow trot down the main road. Naomi watched until he vanished beyond the ridge, then turned inside. The peace he'd left her with was fragile but real. Later that afternoon, Jesse returned, dusk-caked, and carrying 2 sacks of supplies, slung over his shoulders like they weighed nothing. Naomi met him behind the store and helped him unload. No sign of movement yet, he said, handing her a bundle of rope. But the tracks are fresh. They've been circling, testing the edges. How close? Too close. Naomi nodded. We'll be ready. Jesse leaned against the porch post, cracking his neck. I passed Caleb on the east trail. He's heading straight toward Red Wolf Canyon. Naomi tensed. He shouldn't be that far out. He said he wanted to confirm what I saw. She cursed under her breath. If he gets caught out there alone, he knows what he's doing. Naomi paced the porch once, twice, then stopped. We need to finish the trapline tonight. If they come by moonrise, I want the alleyways wired and the rooftops reinforced. Jesse gave a tired smile. You never did anything halfway. Neither did our mother. His smile faded. No, she didn't. They stood in silence a moment longer. Then Jesse said, Do you trust him? Caleb. Naomi's answer came without hesitation. Yes. Jesse nodded once, accepting it. Then I'll trust him too. As the sun dropped behind the mesa, casting the town in long shadows, Naomi felt the quiet again, the kind that came before thunder. The stillness wasn't peace. It was waiting. She walked through the store one last time, checked the rifle, counted the rounds, bolted every door. And then she did something she hadn't done in years. She lit a candle, knelt by her father's old ledger desk, and whispered a prayer she barely remembered. Not for herself, for Caleb, for the town, for the fire she could feel rising behind the hills. If he doesn't come back by dawn, Naomi whispered, I'll ride into hell myself to find him. As night falls, riders gather in the darkness beyond the ridge. Caleb discovers more than he expected, proof of Los Lobos and something far worse. And Naomi, she's already tightening her saddle straps, ready to ride into the storm. The canyon narrowed the further Caleb rode. Red Wolf Canyon was a scar in the earth, steep and coiled with wind that whistled like old spirits. The rock faces stretched upward in jagged silence, bleeding rust-colored dust that clung to everything. He dismounted when the trail turned too tight. The sun hung low now, wedged between horizon and cloud, casting a bronze light across the land. His boots crunched quietly against gravel. Every sense was heightened: eyes darting, ears tuned, fingers resting lightly on the butt of his revolver. Jesse had been right. The signs were everywhere. Broken brush, fresh tracks, horse and boot, a piece of cloth snagged on a mesquite thorn, dark red and stiff with old blood. Caleb crouched, running 2 fingers over the prints. Heavy, fast, 5 riders, maybe 6. They weren't hiding their presence. That was the worst part. Los Lobos wanted to be seen. He followed the trail deeper until the canyon opened just enough to reveal what he hadn't dared to imagine. A camp, half a dozen, blackened fire pits, empty whiskey, bottles, ripped saddlebags, bones. Human. Swallowed hard, tucked between 2 boulders was the burned-out wreckage of a wagon. The axles had melted. The iron rim of one wheel lay twisted in the dirt like a broken jaw. Charred boards scattered around the edge of the camp told the rest of the story. They didn't rob this wagon. They destroyed it. He stepped closer. A faint flutter of fabric caught his eye. Half buried beneath ash, a child's shawl, pale blue, embroidered. He didn't touch it. Instead, he backed away. Heart pounding. Then he heard the whistle. Not the wind. A signal. High, short, deliberate. He spun. A rifle cracked. The shot hit the rock beside him, spraying grit into his eyes. He dove behind a boulder, drew his revolver, and pressed his back to the stone. His breath came fast, shallow. Another shot rang out. Then another. They weren't aiming to kill. They were pinning him. Caleb peeked around the edge, just enough to see one rider silhouetted against the ridge. Then a second appeared from the brush, and a third to the left. Closing in, he was surrounded but not trapped. Not yet. He waited, counted when the 4th shot rang out. He ducked and ran low across the open gap between the rocks, heading toward a dry wash. A bullet grazed the brim of his hat. He didn't stop, slid down the embankment and kept moving, lungs burning, boots slipping on loose shale. He needed to disappear. Fast. At the bottom of the wash, he found what he needed, a narrow crevice between 2 slabs of rock, barely wide enough to squeeze through. He wedged himself in, breath ragged, hand gripping his revolver so tight his knuckles ached. Footsteps echoed above. Spanish, low voices. He caught one name. Rojas, the leader. So he was here, close. And laughing. Caleb waited. Minutes passed. The voices faded. The wind returned. When he was sure they were gone, he crawled out, covered in grit, blood trailing from a shallow cut on his arm. He didn't head back the way he came. He took the riverbed, moving fast, quiet, doubling round ridges, and ducking through game trails, until the mesa came into view again. By the time he reached the outskirts of Red Earth Crossing, it was past midnight. The town slept in uneasy darkness, save for the lantern burning in Naomi's window. He climbed the back steps of the store like a man waking from a nightmare. Naomi opened the door before he could knock. She didn't ask where he'd been. She saw it in his face. "Get inside," she said. He collapsed into the chair by the stove, chest heaving, hat tossed on the floor. Naomi poured water and handed it to him. "I saw it all," he rasped. "The camp, burned wagons, bones. They're not days away. They're already circling." Naomi's jaw clenched. "How many?" "Too many for the sheriff's boys. Maybe a dozen, maybe more. Trained, fast. Rojas is with them." Naomi went still. "You're sure? He speaks like he enjoys killing. Like it's not just business, it's sport." She turned, grabbing the rifle from the counter and slamming it onto the table. "Then we don't wait anymore." She paced once, then stopped. "We go to Clara, Jesse. We prepare for a siege. We evacuate the weak. We set traps." Caleb shook his head. No time for evacuations. They could strike before sunrise. Naomi stared at him, something shifting behind her eyes. "Then, we fight." Jesse burst in moments later, rifle across his chest. "You were spotted," he said to Caleb. "Riders near the south fence line." Caleb stood slowly. "Let them come." Naomi crossed the room and looked both men in the eye. "No more waiting. No more warnings. This is our home." Her voice dropped low, fierce. "We draw the line here. Tonight, we draw the line here. Tonight." As darkness settles over Red Earth Crossing, Naomi, Caleb, and Jesse rally, those willing to stand. Traps are set, rifles loaded, and just as the night reaches its stillest point, the first sound of hooves breaks the silence and the siege begins. The wind died around. Midnight. Red Earth Crossing held its breath. Every door was bolted, every window shuttered. Shadows clung to the alleys like smoke, and not a single dog barked. Naomi stood on the roof of the store, her rifle resting across the ridgepole. Jesse was positioned near the bell tower with a long-range repeater. Caleb crouched behind crates near the east gate, where the road dipped just enough for an ambush. Inside the store, Clara and the teacher, Miss Lorna, guarded the children and the older women. Buckets of water, torn sheets for bandages, and 2 shotguns were ready. Naomi scanned the street. It looked like any other night. That was the trick of it. You never saw the fire until the match had already struck. From the north came the first sound, a single hoof step, then another, then silence. She lifted her rifle, heart steady, breath slow. "They're testing us." Jesse's voice crackled from the rooftop above the church. "Like wolves," Naomi replied low into the wind. "Then let's bite back." The first rider appeared from the tree line, a scout, dressed in black with a red bandana pulled tight across his face. His horse stepped carefully, sensing the wrongness in the quiet. Behind him came 2 more, then a 4th. They weren't charging. Not yet. They were watching. A test. Naomi waited until the lead horse passed the 3rd marker, an old wagon wheel, nailed to a post stand. Then she fired. The shot cracked across the town like a hammer. The scout dropped instantly, his horse bolting. The others scattered to returning fire in panic. Jesse's repeater barked twice, and one of the fleeing riders tumbled from his saddle in a limp heap. The siege had begun. Naomi reloaded fast, moved to the south edge of the roof, and ducked behind the chimney. Bullets ripped into the wood siding below. She didn't flinch. Down below, Caleb rolled from cover and fired twice into the darkness, driving back a flanking group trying to circle the general store. He shouted to the deputies in the alley, "Hold the line. Don't waste bullets." They obeyed, but barely. Fear clung to them like sweat. From behind the mercantile, Naomi caught movement. 3 more riders charging from the blind side. She aimed, fired. 1 fell. The others veered off, but not before throwing a lit bottle. It exploded against the side of the blacksmith's shed. Flames leaped skyward, licking the dark. Naomi's voice rang out across the rooftops. "Fire team, north shed." Jesse climbed down from the bell tower, rallying to townsmen with buckets. They doused the blaze before it could jump to the stable. Inside the store, Clara ushered the children deeper into the cellar. Miss Lorna locked eyes with her and asked, "You ever seen war before?" Clara replied, voice flat, "Once, in Mexico. This is worse." Outside, the street turned into chaos. Los Lobos didn't retreat. They pressed forward. 10, maybe 12 now, well armed, fanned across both sides of the street. One shouted something in Spanish. Orders. Naomi caught a glimpse of him. Tall, thin eyes, black as coal, even from a distance. Rojas. He carried himself like a preacher at a funeral. No panic, no hurry, like he already believed the town belonged to him. Jesse slid behind a broken cart, breath coming heavy. "That's him. He's calling the shots." Caleb took cover behind a feed barrel. "Then we take out the voice." Naomi's voice cut in from above. "He's mine." The men didn't argue. She waited, watched. Warhorse moved confidently, not bothering with cover. When he stopped near the old well, Naomi took a breath and squeezed the trigger. The bullet struck the stone beside him. An inch off. Rojas didn't flinch. He turned slowly, looked directly at her across the darkness, and tipped his hat. Like he knew, like he'd been waiting for her. Naomi froze. It wasn't fear, it was recognition, something deep. Old Rojas raised his revolver and fired the chimney beside. Naomi shattered. Stone rained across the rooftop. She dropped low, heart slamming. Below, Caleb used a moment to flank left, catching 2 riders in a crossfire. One fell, the other fled into the alleys. The townsfolk were holding for now, but they were outgunned. Naomi knew it. She slid down from the roof and ran toward the stable, where Jesse was gathering what few explosives they had left. 2 crates of dynamite and 3 homemade firebombs. "This won't stop them," he said. "Not unless we hit their heart." Naomi wiped blood from her cheek. "Then we hit it." They split the dynamite between them, wrapping cloth fuses. Naomi strapped one to her belt and passed the others to Caleb as he arrived. "We take the middle building," she said. "The old saloon. They're nesting in it now. You light it. You trap them," Jesse said. Naomi nodded. "Exactly." Caleb didn't argue. The 3 of them sprinted through the shadows, swift, cutting behind buildings and ducking gunfire. The saloon was half collapsed, its front windows shattered, its doors swinging open like broken jaws. Inside, they heard voices. Rojas was in there. Naomi lit the fuse, counted to 3, tossed it through the window. They ran. The explosion tore through the building with a bone-deep roar. Flame and smoke spewed skyward. The ground shook. Glass shattered up and down the block. The fire caught fast. They waited in the alley, rifles raised. As figures stumbled out of the smoke, blinded, burned, disoriented. The townsfolk didn't hesitate. Shots rang out. The tide turned. Naomi didn't see Rojas among the fallen. She looked to Jesse. He shook his head. He's not dead. Caleb stepped beside her, revolver smoking. Then he'll come back. Naomi watched the flames rise, a grim calm settling over her. We'll be ready. That wasn't his end, Naomi said. That was just his warning shot. As the town reels from the siege and begins counting its losses, Naomi and Jesse must prepare for Rojas's next move, because somewhere in the hills, the real war is still coming, and this time, it's personal. Smoke still hung low over Red Earth Crossing when the sun climbed over the canyon rim, casting an orange glow over the smoldering remains of the old saloon. Ash floated through the streets like snow. Naomi stood in the middle of it, all discovered, blood-smeared, and upright. The rifle in her hands was cold now, the barrel scorched from overuse. Her eyes scanned the devastation. 3 buildings burned beyond repair. 2 townsfolk were dead, 5 injured, but they were alive, and Rojas had escaped. The town was silent, the kind of silence that followed only chaos or death, a silence where even the survivors didn't know what came next. Caleb leaned against the hitching post outside the general store, shoulder wrapped in a bloodied bandage. He hadn't slept, neither had Naomi. Jesse paced the length of the boardwalk, tossing a bullet in one hand, jaw clenched. Clara emerged from the cellar with Miss Lorna and the children, blinking into the light. Naomi caught her eye. Clara nodded once. They're safe. For now. Naomi looked past her toward the hills. But he's not done. Caleb joined her. That was a probe. The real strike hasn't come yet. He left half his men behind, Jesse added. Expendable. It was never about taking the town. It was about seeing how far we'd go to protect it. Naomi felt the truth of it settle in her bones. Rojas wanted to see her fight. He'd found what he was looking for. By noon, they had buried the dead. The blacksmith's boy, one of the younger deputies, and a woman from the bakery, caught in the wrong place when the firebombs started falling. Naomi led the small service. No preacher left in town. We mourn them today, she said, voice flat, but tomorrow we fight for them. The townsfolk stood in a tight circle, heads bowed, hands clenched. This wasn't grief, it was a promise. That night, Naomi sat with Jesse behind the store, sharpening knives. The moon was a pale eye in a black sky. He left something behind, Jesse said. Naomi paused. What do you mean? This. He pulled a folded note from his pocket, singed at the edges, written in slanted, looping Spanish. It was tucked under a saddlebag on one of the dead riders. She read it silently. Rojas's handwriting, a message. Naomi, you surprised me. That doesn't happen often, but one fire never stops a storm. You and I were not done. Naomi crushed the note in her fist. He wants me to come to him. That's a trap, Jesse said. Of course it is, she replied. But waiting, here's worse. Caleb walked up from the shadows. There's more. We found a map. In the saddlebag, coordinates, east of the canyon, near the Ghost Ridge, old mining town. Naomi looked at both men. That's where he'll be. Preparing, resting, licking his wounds, but not for long. Jesse exhaled. We need a plan. Naomi stood. No, we need a war. At sunrise, she called the town together. Those who could shoot, those who could ride, those with grudges deep enough to cut bone. She stood on the church steps, dirt streaked down her neck, the rifle slung across her back like a sword. You saw what they did, she said. You felt what they tried to take. They think we're just dust and fear. She looked across the crowd. Faces scarred, eyes hollow, but not broken. We're going to show them what Red Earth Crossing is made of, not with words, not with prayers, but with fire, grit, and blood. She stepped down into the crowd. We ride at first light. Whoever rides with me, saddle up. Whoever stays, you guard what's left, and you pray we make it back. Caleb stepped forward first. I'm with you. Jesse followed. All the way. Clara raised her hand. I've patched wounds before. I'll do it again. By nightfall, they had a plan. 10 riders. 4 pack horses. Enough ammunition to burn a hole in the earth, and Naomi at the front. She stood alone that night before leaving, overlooking the canyon edge. The wind pulled at her coat. She whispered to the dark, "This ends with one of us in the dirt, and I don't plan on being the one who falls." "We don't ride for vengeance," Naomi said. "We ride to bury a wolf." Naomi and her riders head into the Ghost Ridge under cover of darkness. But as they draw closer to the enemy's stronghold, they discover the scale of Rojas's operation and the cost it will take to stop him for good. Ghost Ridge wasn't on any map. It was a name whispered in saloons and among dying men, a place where miners once struck silver and the land struck back harder. Now, the bones of that boomtown sat rotting under sun and silenced half-buried cabins, broken rails, a church with no bell, and a mine entrance yawning like a dead man's mouth. Naomi stared at it from the top of the ridge, her horse snorting at the scent of gunpowder in the wind. 10 riders flanked her, Jesse just behind, Caleb beside her, Clara in the rear with the supplies and extra ammo. Below them, smoke curled from chimneys, shadows moved between buildings. Los Lobos was here, not hiding, not retreating. Settled. "They're preparing for something big," Jesse whispered, scanning the camp through a spyglass. "More men than before, twice as many, maybe more." Caleb nodded. "They brought in new guns, hired muscle. This isn't a gang anymore, it's a militia." Naomi said nothing. Her eyes traced every movement in the camp, every shift in wind, every escape route. Then she turned to the others. "This place has 3 weaknesses: the mineshaft, the dry creek bed, and the old water tower. We split into 3 groups. Caleb takes the creek, Jesse and Clara, the tower. I'll go through the shaft." Jesse frowned. That shaft could collapse. So could everything if we don't act. She slid off her horse, rifle in hand. "We hit them at dusk. Quiet at first, then loud. We create confusion, split their ranks. They won't expect a frontal fight. They think we're still licking our wounds." Clara tied her hair back. "They'll regret underestimating us." Naomi gave one last look to the broken town below. "Tonight, we turn their ghosts against them." By the time dusk bled into night, the riders had moved into position. The sky turned from orange to ink. Coyotes howled in the distance. Naomi crouched at the edge of the mineshaft, her boots scraping against old rails. The air inside was stale and thick. She moved slowly, every step a risk. The tunnel dipped downward, then curved east. She could hear voices above her laughter. Drunken, careless, she counted at least 6 men. Maybe more. She found the ladder to the surface, rotting but intact. Quietly, she climbed. At the same time, Jesse and Clara reached the base of the water tower. Jesse rigged the dynamite, wrapping the cloth fuse with care. Clara stood watch, rifle ready, her eyes sharp in the moonlight. In the creek bed, Caleb and 2 riders crawled through the brush, inching toward the back of the saloon where Rojas had likely set up camp. Then, the first blast. The tower exploded in a burst of wood and fire, sending a geyser of splinters and smoke into the air. Men in the camp shouted, stumbling from cabins. Riders charged from the creek, guns blazing. Caleb took out 2 before the third ducked behind cover and returned fire. Naomi burst from the mineshaft, rifle already raised. She hit the man at the gate, dropped to one knee, and fired again. Screams filled the night. It was chaos. Jesse and Clara took the north side. Caleb's men hid from the west. Naomi drove straight into the heart. She moved like a storm fast, focused. Every shot mattered. Every step forward was earned. Then she saw him. Rojas. Standing on the saloon steps, gun drawn, coat fluttering. He wasn't running. He was waiting. Naomi stepped into the street. Dust swirled. The fight raged around them. But here, in this stretch of dirt and silence, it was just the 2 of them. She didn't raise her rifle. Neither did he. "You came," Rojas said, almost gently. Naomi kept walking. "I told you we weren't finished," he added. "You were right," she replied. "We're ending this now." Rojas smiled, slow and cold. "I hope he brought enough bullets." From behind him, 3 men emerged. His inner circle, trained, loyal. Naomi lifted her rifle. "Don't need bullets," she said. "I brought hell." She fired. The man on the left dropped. Jesse shot the second from the side. The third ducked, but Clara took him clean. Then it was just Rojas. He moved fast-drawn revolver. 3 shots in succession. Naomi rolled, came up behind a trough, returned fire. 1 bullet clipped his shoulder. He growled, staggered, but stayed on his feet. "You shoot like your father," he spat. She froze. Rojas grinned, blood on his teeth. "He begged before he died. Did you know that?" Her world tilted. "You lie. I was there. He made me promise to leave you out of it. Told me you were better than this, better than him." Naomi stood. Her hands didn't shake. I am better, she said. Then she shot him once in the chest. Twice more as he fell. The saloon behind him caught fire. One of the stray dynamite sticks had landed near the whiskey barrels. Flames licked upward, casting a flickering orange glow. Rojas gasped, staring up at her. Naomi stepped closer. He begged. She asked. He nodded weakly. Then he died a better man than you'll ever be. His eyes went still. It was done. Around her the last of the gunfire faded. Caleb emerged from the smoke, Jesse behind him. Clara limped into view, blood on her sleeve. Naomi didn't speak. She simply nodded. It was over. Ghost Ridge was silent again. This time, for good. Rojas is dead, Naomi said. But peace doesn't come easy. Not out here. As they return to Red Earth Crossing, the town begins to rebuild, but Naomi finds that victory leaves its own wounds, and in the quiet aftermath, new threats and old secrets begin to stir. Peace, it turns out, is just another kind of war. The sun rose over Red Earth Crossing like it didn't know what the town had just lived through. Light spilled over broken fences, shattered windows, and blood-stained streets, now quiet for the first time in weeks. Naomi rode in ahead of the others. She didn't raise her hand to wave. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. She just looked at the boarded-up schoolhouse, the burned saloon, the half-sagging water tower where Clara had lit the fuse that turned the tide. Every building carried a wound. Every survivor carried more. And in Naomi's chest something heavier than grief. They had won, but what did they really have left? Behind her, the riders returned one by one, dismounting in silence. Townsfolk came out slowly, as if afraid to believe it was really over. Miss Lorna stepped forward, wiping her hands on her apron. Is it done? Naomi nodded. Rojas is dead. Gasps, murmurs, relief, but not joy. Just release. The next days blurred together, burying the bodies, boarding the broken buildings, scrubbing blood from floors. Clara ran triage in the schoolhouse, now a makeshift clinic. Jesse helped the blacksmith rebuild the gate. Caleb took a crew to patch the eastern wall. Naomi took none of those tasks. She patrolled, watched, waited. The town felt different, like it had held its breath so long, it forgot how to exhale. People said, thank you. They offered food, asked when the store would reopen. Naomi answered with nods. Maybe, soon we'll see. But something inside her stayed cold. One night, as she stood under the stars behind the store, Caleb came to her. He didn't speak at first, just stood beside her in the dark. Then, you haven't slept. No, you haven't eaten. He looked at her face, then past her to the hills. You did what you had to do. She nodded, eyes never leaving the horizon. But I'm not sure who I am without that fight, she said. He stepped closer. You're still you. That doesn't change, doesn't it? Silence again. Then Caleb said quietly, I've seen men win wars and never come home, even when they're standing on their own porch. Naomi's voice cracked. I came back, Caleb. I just don't know what to do with the quiet. He reached for her hand. I'll stay in the quiet with you, however long it takes. For the first time, she let herself lean into him, but peace was short. 3 days later, a rider came from the north, not from Los Lobos, not a scout, a soldier, U.S. Cavalry Blue. He rode in at noon, dust trailing behind like smoke. Naomi met him in front of the church, flanked by Jesse and Clara. The man dismounted, tipping his hat. Ma'am, he said. Names, Lieutenant Markham. We've had reports. Gang activity, violence, several casualties. I'm here to investigate. Naomi crossed her arms. It's been handled. Markham glanced at the blackened saloon, the empty gallows post, the scars still fresh on every wall. So I see. He pulled a folded paper from his saddlebag and handed it over. Official orders. My superiors want a report. Names, witness statements. And, he added, we're investigating Rojas, not just for what happened here but across 3 counties. There's talk of someone backing him, someone bigger. Naomi stiffened. Caleb stepped in. He's dead. Naomi shot him herself. Markham looked at Naomi. And where's the body? She blinked. Buried, out near Ghost Ridge. Markham raised an eyebrow. Convenient. No witnesses. Jesse bristled. You calling her a liar? Markham held up a hand. I'm just doing my job. Naomi folded the paper and handed it back. Then do it elsewhere. I'm afraid I can't. She didn't flinch. Why not? Because if there's someone bigger behind all this, they're going to come looking. And when they do, this town better be ready. That night, Naomi sat alone in her father's chair, reading through old ledgers. She found one from years ago, dates supplies, and a strange note scribbled in the margin. RJ shipment delayed, said he'd bring double next time. Mentioned a backer out of Yuma. Her father had known Rojas. More than that, he may have done business with him. She closed the book and stared at the wall. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. If Rojas was just the blade, Naomi said, then we still have to face the hand that held it. With the cavalry's presence in town and questions swirling around her father's past, Naomi must decide if the truth is worth unearthing, especially if it means exposing secrets the town never wanted to face. The rain came before dawn, not a cleansing rain, a cold one, hard, steady, and without mercy. It soaked the rooftops, turned the dirt roads to sludge, and filled the cracks in the bones of red earth crossing. Naomi stood in the back storeroom, holding the ledger tight in her hands. Her father's handwriting stared back at her, deliberate, familiar. RJ shipment delayed, said he'd bring double next time. Mentioned a backer out of Yuma. Something about that word unsettled her. She flipped through older pages. There it was again. And again, always initials, always shipments. Some dates matched the period when the gang activity along the southern trade routes had first picked up. Her father hadn't just known Rojas. He'd done business with him multiple times. And this backer, whoever they were, they'd been in the picture for years. She looked up as Clara entered. Dripping wet hair stuck to her cheeks. I saw the light on, Clara said. Couldn't sleep either. Naomi handed her the ledger. Got Clara read silently. When she looked up, her face was pale. You think your father? I don't know, Naomi said quickly. Maybe he didn't know who Rojas really was. Maybe it was just freight. Maybe. Clara said nothing, because the maybes didn't matter. What mattered was that someone had been funding the chaos. And it hadn't started with Rojas. He was the knife, but someone else had aimed it. Later that morning, Lieutenant Markham returned, soaked through but stubborn. He knocked once on the store's front door. Naomi let him in. I need a word, he said, dripping on her floor. She handed him a towel. You ever hear the name Vance McCall? He asked. Naomi's stomach turned. Railroad baron, she said. Used to own half of the line between Yuma and Bisbee. Still does. Officially retired. Unofficially, he's got hands in a dozen smuggling rings. No one's pinned anything on him, but he's dirty. Naomi leaned against the counter. You think he was behind Rojas? I don't know yet, Markham said. But every time I tug on a thread, his name shows up. And that mine near Ghost Ridge used to be his. Sold it cheap to a company that never mined a thing. Just kept the deed. No workers, no records. Shell company, Naomi muttered. Exactly. Markham stepped closer. Look, I know we didn't start off well, but if we want to stop what's coming, I need someone who knows the land, knows the people, someone they'll talk to. Naomi folded her arms. You want me to spy for you? I want you to survive what's coming. She looked past him, out the window, where the rain hadn't let up. Where do we start? That afternoon, Naomi, Jesse, and Markham rode north to a supply outpost listed in her father's ledgers, an abandoned relay station near an old cattle trail. They arrived just as the rain turned to mist. The building was gutted, roof half collapsed, but inside, behind a false panel in the floor, they found crates marked with a railway logo. Inside, ammunition, explosives, maps. Jesse whistled low. This ain't leftover bandit loot. This is military grade. Markham looked grim. This proves supply lines. Whoever ran this operation wasn't just robbing towns. They were planning something bigger. Naomi opened one of the maps. Trade routes, border paths, red circles over specific towns, red earth crossing included. Her breath caught. They weren't just hitting random places, she said. They were building a corridor for smuggling, or worse. Markham nodded. And the more I dig, the more I see McCall's shadow behind it all. Jesse paced. So we take it to the law. Markham shook his head. There's no law left strong enough. Not out here. Naomi stared at the crates. So we bring the fight to him. That night, back in town, Naomi sat in her father's old chair. The ledger lay open beside her. The rain had stopped, but the air was heavy. She thought about the past year, the silence in her father's voice before he died, the worry in his eyes, the night she'd found him burning papers in the hearth, telling her it was just old junk. She hadn't believed him then. Now, she was sure he'd known he was in deep. and he'd tried to get out. She pulled the ledger to her chest, closed her eyes, and whispered, "I forgive you, but I can't forget." In the morning, she stood before the townsfolk again. This time, her voice didn't waver. "There's another storm coming," she said. "We thought killing Rojas would be the end. It wasn't. He was just a page. The book's still open." She held up the map. "They're coming to claim the land, to wipe out towns like ours and pave the way for a pipeline of crime, gold, and blood. We either stand and stop it or watch everything fall apart." She looked around. Faces once afraid were now hard, ready. "We don't fight because we want war," she finished. "We fight because this time, they're not sending bandits. They're sending an empire." "Rojas was a storm," Naomi said, "but Vance McCall, he's the damn weather." Naomi and her crew must now ride to Yuma to uncover hard evidence, challenge the empire behind the bloodshed, and bring the truth into the open. If they can survive what's waiting in the shadows of McCall's domain. Yuma wasn't a city, it was a beast, hot, loud, and built on other people's backs. Trains screamed through at all hours. Dust coated everything: windows, boots, bones. Men barked over dice games and gun prices. Women watched from balconies with painted lips and tired eyes. Naomi had seen zounds quieter than Yuma's main square. She rode in with Jesse and Clara beside her, and Lieutenant Markham just behind. They wore plain clothes, dusted off the trail, but the weight in their eyes gave them away. They weren't here for trade. They were hunting. They set up in a boarding house above a tailor's shop. 1 room, 2 beds, shared bath down the hall. Jesse grumbled. Clara ignored him. Naomi unpacked slowly, her eyes scanning the street below. "Any word from your contact?" she asked Markham. He nodded. "Tomorrow night, east side of the rail yard. Name's Harris. Worked with the postal service. Started sniffing around McCall's finances. Found a ledger he wasn't supposed to see." "Then why hasn't he gone to the law?" Jesse asked. Markham shrugged. "Because when you go after someone like McCall, you better be ready to burn your life to the ground." The next morning, they spread out across town. Clara walked the market, listening. Jesse visited the saloons. Naomi headed straight for the county records office, hoping to find proof of McCall's ownership: old deeds, forged transfers, anything that tied him to Ghost Ridge. She found more than she expected. Buried in a side ledger, under the name Douglas Mining Corp., was a land purchase, signed over from Vance McCall, dated 3 months before the first Los Lobos raid. She copied it. Another document. Alder McCall purchasing the ridge outright from the Federal Rail Commission, using a cutout company based in Missouri. And then a final note, a sealed complaint, never processed, alleging fraud and racketeering. The complaint, filed by a man named Walter Jameson. Naomi blinked. Her father. Back at the boarding house, she showed the files to Markham. "He knew," she whispered. "He tried to expose McCall. They shut him down." Markham stared at the signature. "That's enough to put pressure on him. Maybe even drag this out into the light." Naomi shook her head. "We don't have time. If McCall knows we're here, he'll move everything. Burn the ledgers. Silence the witnesses. We need to hit first." That night, they went to meet Harris. The rail yard was a maze of steel and smoke. Shadows moved like phantoms between the cars. Naomi moved cautiously, hand on her hip. Harris was late. Then a whistle. 3 short bursts. Markham recognized it. "That's him." They followed the sound to an old maintenance shack. Inside, a man in his 40s, sharp eyes, nervous fingers. "You weren't followed?" he asked. "No," Naomi said. "You've got documents?" Harris nodded, pulling out a thick envelope. "Ledgers, logs, payment slips, all of it. Enough to ruin McCall, if someone's got the guts to take it to court." Naomi took the papers, leafed through them. Everything matched. And then a creak outside. "Get down," Jesse shouted. Gunfire ripped through the shack wall. Harris screamed and went down, hit in the shoulder. Naomi dropped to her stomach, returning fire through a broken window. 2 men in dark coats advanced from the tracks. Professional, silent. Hitmen. Markham pulled Harris to cover. Jesse lobbed a lantern toward the shooters. It shattered in flame. Buying them seconds. Naomi kicked open the back door. Out. Now. They ran through crates and coiled hose, dodging bullets. Clara dragged Harris. Markham covered their flank. They didn't stop running until they reached the stables. Jesse slammed the door behind them. They knew we were coming. Naomi's mind was racing. McCall doesn't wait. He strikes. Markham checked Harris's wound. He'll live, but he can't testify now, Clara said. He's a target. Naomi grabbed the envelope, now soaked with blood. Then we use what he gave us. We take it public. We hit McCall where it hurts. Markham hesitated. That means stepping in front of the world. Newspapers, federal eyes. No going back. Naomi looked at the night sky over Umared lightning. In the far distance, there was no going back. The day he signed my father's death, they spent the night planning, distributing copies of the evidence, writing letters to the Arizona Territory Press, contacting the one honest judge Markham still trusted. By morning, every major newspaper from Phoenix to Santa Fe had received a package, and McCall had a name on his doorstep, Naomi Jameson. As they packed to leave the city, Markham gave her one last look. He'll send everything he has after you now. Naomi checked her rifle. Then we shoot back harder. He buried my father with ink and silence, Naomi said. Let's see how he handles fire. With McCall exposed, Naomi must rally allies for the final showdown, because the empire won't fall quietly, and the cost of justice is about to come due in blood. The desert air hung still, no wind, no buzz of cicadas, no vultures circling above. Just the tension, the kind that comes before a storm, or a gunfight that can't be avoided. Red Earth Crossing stood ready. The townsfolk lined the street, rifles over shoulders, nerves taut as wire. Clara stationed herself on the rooftop of the general store, long-range rifle balanced on a sack of grain. Jesse and Caleb flanked the main road, hidden behind overturned wagons. Markham and 3 other cavalry defectors had taken up positions around the church, and Naomi stood in the middle of Main Street. Boots planted, rifle in hand, hat low over her eyes. Waiting. The dust cloud came first, then the glint of sunlight on steel. Dozens of riders, black coats, clean saddles, disciplined movement. McCall's private army. No bandits this time. This was the machine at the front. In a carriage too fine for the desert sat Vance McCall, white hair slicked back, ivory cane in hand, a ghost of a smile on his face as he stepped down. He didn't carry a gun. He didn't need one. Behind him stood hired killers, soldiers bought with gold and silence. He walked straight toward Naomi, as if none of the rifles pointed at his head mattered. Miss Jameson, he said smoothly, you've made quite the mess. Naomi didn't blink. That's funny. I was thinking the same about you. McCall gave a dry chuckle. You think this changes anything? A few ledgers, a dead gang leader. This land still answers to power, and power doesn't come from justice. It comes from fear. Naomi's voice was steady. Then let's see what happens when fear fights back. He sighed, as if disappointed. You could have sold, taken the money, left this place behind. I'm not for sale. Neither is this town. McCall tilted his head. Everyone's for sale. Eventually, a shot rang out. One of McCall's men fell. Clara, from the rooftop. Gunfire exploded across the street. Bullets sliced through heat and smoke. Screams echoed off the church walls. Naomi dropped low, rolled behind a trough, and fired 3 times. Jesse's shotgun roared from the alley. Markham's men cut down to riders trying to flank the west side, but McCall wasn't running. He stood in the middle of it, an expression blank, eyes sharp. Naomi broke cover and sprinted through the chaos. She dove behind the overturned cart and popped up. Rifle aimed. McCall turned, their eyes locked. She squeezed the trigger, but he ducked behind his carriage. Another shot clipped her shoulder, and she fell hard. Jesse was there in seconds, dragging her behind cover. You all right? Fine, she gritted. Blood ran down her arm. She reloaded, breath shaking. This ends now. The battle was brutal, short, final. By the time the dust settled, 15 of McCall's men were dead. The rest fled. Jesse took a graze to the ribs. Clara's arm was broken. Caleb limped, with a leg wound, and McCall was on his knees, his coat torn, eyes wild. Naomi walked toward him, gun lowered but loaded. Markham held the papers in his hands, confessions from 2 of McCall's lieutenants, naming him as the architect behind smuggling routes, gang raids, and illegal land seizures. The press would print them. The government would come. Naomi stood over the man who'd tried to erase her home. McCall looked up, sneering. Go ahead, shoot me. You'll just prove me right. Naomi holstered her rifle. No, she said. You don't get to make this clean. You'll stand trial. In public. You'll rot in the same system you thought you owned. He spit at her boots. She didn't flinch. 3 weeks later, the headlines rolled out across the territory. Territory tycoon exposed in widespread land fraud. Jameson family clears name. Town of Red Earth Crossing defies corruption. Red Earth Crossing began to heal, slowly, one nail, one board, one morning at a time. The saloon was rebuilt not as a den of gambling and rot, but a community hall. Clara opened a clinic. Jessie started teaching shooting lessons to the younger townsfolk. Caleb took over the general store. And Naomi, she stayed, not because she had to, but because it was home. One morning, she stood at the edge of town, watching the sun climb over the canyons, painting the sky orange and pink. Markham joined her, letter in hand. "Marshall's office offered you a position," he said. "Said you've got the makings of a frontier legend." Naomi smiled faintly. "I'm not interested in legends. What are you interested in?" She looked at the rebuilt town, at the people who stayed, fought, lived, truth, peace, maybe a little stubborn hope. Markham nodded. "That's rarer than gold out here." She tipped her hat. "Then I'll guard it like it's worth something." They stood in silence for a while. The wind stirred, town breathed, and for the first time in a long time Naomi did too.